This is AMP Talks. My name is Rouven, and I'm here with Don Palathara, director of Family, Everything is Cinema, and many, many other features. Family had its world premiere at International Festival Rotterdam recently, and we're here to talk about the film. We're here to talk about the setting. We're here to talk about the characters, and we'll see where the interview will take us. So thanks for taking the time, Don. And
yeah, thank you, Rouven. It's a pleasure to join you, and lovely to meet you here.
Family is like many of your other features situated or set in the, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Ideki district in Kerala, where you're from. And I've heard somewhere that your perception naturally, as you grow older, of your home changes over time. How has this change in perception of this particular place and of the people, of its culture, changed over time, and how has this changed infused family?
Yeah, see, I was born and brought up in a village in Kerala called Karnapuram. It's in the district of Idukki. It's the hill. It's a hilly area, and that is where the family is short in my native town actually. So yeah, when I was growing up there, the kind of life I was used to and I was surrounded by was very religious and very orthodox in a sense. And that but early exposure to religious texts and other religious books gave me certain idea about morality and certain Christian way of thinking. But later I found out that as I was growing up, I in the society I started observing a contrast or a contradiction between what we were believing and what we were actually practicing, or what the daily life surrounding church even. So so that then I, as an individual, I started asking questions, and luckily I was encouraged to ask more questions so they could give me answers. But there came a point where they ran out of answers, and then I had to find my own answers. Then I think this the huge shift in the thought came probably by the age of 15 or 16, when I started reading more materialistic philosophy and that kind of stuff. Then I started realizing a different side of life or different aspect of life, and I got more used to the Western way of thinking. So uh, I think not just Western. I think in term like different schools of thinking. So I think that is the point. There was a definite othering between my past and what I was at that point.
Somewhere in the coverage of Family, when it was screened in Rotterdam, I read that you consider Family a horror film. Could you explain that a little bit, why you think it's a horror film? Because I think it's a very atypical to what you would normally consider a horror film.
Yeah, not in the conventional sense, or in the I'm not talking about it as a genre. It's more I'm talking about the what I felt as an individual, or as a filmmaker while going through the process of making the film. It was not very pleasant experience at that time, but it did give, at the end of the process, it did give me a kind of relief. But in the beginning, like during the pre-production, while I was there, while I was actually going through the pre-production process itself, at one point I couldn't stay at that place any longer, because it was um, weighing. It was getting too heavy for me to experience, and meet the same people that you are going to portray in the film, you are meeting them in real life, and it was getting too much. And then I took a break and I left. I came back to Kochi again, stayed here for another 4 or 5 days, and then I went back there. After gathering a little more energy, I went back there and started filming. And also in the film, I wanted to have this sense of eeriness and this that I was feeling. I wanted that to communicate through the film as well. Yeah.
I had the feeling that with this film, and also from reading about the other films that you have done, that rather than telling a story in the conventional sense, you are actually more interested in covering or recording a certain condition. Can you explain that a little bit? What kind of condition were you interested in?
See, that I think that statement would come from what I would like to see in a film also, because I like to make the kind of films that I would like to watch. So I don't like being told where to look or what specifically to think. I would like it much more if a filmmaker gives me a puzzle to solve, or if they give me a bunch of ideas to think about and process and come out with my own conclusions. That is the sort of thing I respect in films that I watch. So that is the kind of things I'm trying to make in my films too.
In your answer to the first and second question, you already elaborated a little bit about how church and religion played a role in your life and how it has infused features such as family. But could you explain that influence a little bit? Because I had the feeling that, especially with family, church and religion was almost like a separate character in the film itself.
Yeah, see, it is, I don't know how, if I'm able to articulate that in a bunch of words, but it was the power of religion and the community itself was too overpowering. It was, you are almost helpless while you are, especially a child, and you are growing up. You start having ideas that are not very acceptable. At that time, you feel very helpless. Even if you ask questions, or even if you oppose those ideas, they are not very welcome, because there are not many people who would support you. Even if they support you, they wouldn't support you openly. So I think it is that urge to be accepted, or it is that urge to be heard, that that is still driving me to respond to those questions even after this many years.
Let's talk a little bit about your main actor. I hope I pronounce his name correctly. Vinay Fortt. Is
Yeah,
his
Vinay
name?
Fortt.
Vinay Fortt as Sonny. Is that
Yes.
how you pronounce it? Okay. Can you describe your approach to this particular character, and what was your most important direction to Mr. Ford when he approached that character?
Vinay and I have been. Vinay is already an very established actor in Malayalam. He has acted in so many films that I grown up watching, and when we started talking, it was after my previous film. Um, we started discussion about how we can think about making a film together. And at that time, I didn't have the idea of family, and it took me we took another maybe more than a year to come up with this particular idea. And then I didn't. For this particular character, I didn't think about any other actor at all. It was from the beginning itself. It was Vinay, because there are multiple reasons. One is the looks. Vinay, the way he looks, and his image in the Kerala film scenario. because he is considered, and his film, usually his films are considered to be very friendly, and his characters are usually the characters given to him are usually very next door neighbor kind of character, or a very helping, the kind of aura that Sony was trying to give. But like without going into other details of the character, that's the and he one experience I had was in Rotterdam. A bunch of Kerala people came to watch the film, and they said that now we have an entirely different image of Vinay after watching this film, because that particular image that was created by the mainstream media was shattered. So yeah, so that was there in my mind, to attribute to the character of Sony as well. Then yeah, but in terms of directions, I just gave him the script, and then we had a talk. A couple of times we talked about the character. Then Vinay had his own suggestions. He had his own ideas about how to portray this character, and he's a very intelligent actor that way, and he knew exactly what was expected out of Sony, and it was working with him was really a breeze. So yeah, I didn't have to struggle at all. Even when we had to go for several takes, he was very cooperative, and like there are no other dramas that we usually hear about in films. It was such a pleasant experience for me.
Even though your experience is limited because family has just been to one festival in Rotterdam, but do you have any particular reactions in mind, especially regarding this, the portrayal of Sony? Because when I watched it together with my wife from a completely different cultural background, we had this image in mind of, I know he isn't, but we had this image in mind of serial killers who are sometimes said that they seem like busybodies, they are the helping hand in their community, but little by little you get to know their, let's say, problematic or even dangerous background. Did you have some similar reactions to that character, or do you remember some?
I haven't had that much experience yet, so but I am ready to face any. I'm very curious to see what kind of reactions people give. But one thing I noticed in Rotterdam was I could attend two different screenings out of the three public screenings, and both of them were entirely different. The two the age category of the audience were quite distinguishable from these two screenings, and there itself I could see a different sort of reaction. The first screening, after the first screening, people were kind of quiet. Not many, but they stayed for the Q&A, but they didn't talk much. It was they were still contemplating, or they were still very silent. Um, but for the second screening, people were very active, and they were asking a lot of questions. The discussions continued even after we got out of the screening. So it was an entirely different experience. So yeah, I think it would depend on who the audience are or what their background is.
Since you're also the editor of Family and also in all of your other films, is there a particular scene in Family that didn't make it to the final cut, but which you still think of as, really beautiful or really awesome that you would have liked to cut but couldn't because of, let's say, terms of pacing or other reasons?
Yes, there are a bunch of scenes like that, but um, there is this one beautiful scene I remember. That is, I really liked it for technical reasons. I really liked it for the, it was the same setup in that grandfather's room, and but with different characters. Sony was there, and this character called Jaya was there, and the grandfather was also there. It was a different lighting, but the same angle that we have seen twice before. So like I would have liked to later look at it, like the difference between those three scenes, just to feel good about how different they were lit, and how different they would feel while comparing. But later I felt that, like it was actually distracting the main from the main theme, and it was like then the duration would also mean it would get too longer, so I didn't want that. So yeah, but there are many more scenes that we had to cut from the final cut.
With regards to everything is cinema, I found an interesting quote from you, and you said that in the times of the lockdown or in the times of the pandemic, there was no other option but to look at each other. And in everything is cinema, but also I find this in family. There are qualities like contemplation, reflection, and observation that you stress or emphasize in your way of filmmaking. Do you think these aspects, like I mentioned, observation, contemplation, and really reflection, is lacking in modern cinema?
I do feel that sometimes, but luckily we still have a lot of films that do all these things. In Rotterdam itself, I found so many different films that were doing contemplation in different ways, not just the way I am used to or the way I reflect, but in different ways, and using the medium of cinema itself in a and showing me the possibilities in which I can also try to work in the future.
I remember a statement also, I think from Lav Diaz. He said that when it came to the long takes that he usually does, he said, I don't have an agenda in my mind. I'm letting the image or the situation or the person or whoever I am observing dictate the way I shoot and how long the scene should be. Do you have a similar approach when it comes to the, let's say, a scene or a sequence?
I would, but at the same time, I have heard Palathara saying that he knows what happens exactly at what second of the film. But I have a middle ground, I think, because because there are certain things I demand from the scene, but at the same time, certain other things you cannot control. For example, when you're shooting outside in a location, there's weather, there's a wind coming. You cannot control such things, and you don't. And I don't really try to control them. Also, I try to, but I give different takes, and sometimes some of them work much better, or sometimes magically something was a wind would come towards the end of the shot, and then I would keep that if it's working for the film. But if it's not, then I would go for another take. So yeah, that's the way I work usually.
Actually, I do think your film has not so much to do with the directors that you're normally compared to, at least in the other interviews, because I always hear you being compared to Lav Diaz or Palathara because of slow cinema, which I'll come to in a moment. I had the feeling that had more to do with an approach would I see in art. For example, in Peter Greenaway's The Broadman's Contract, where you have long takes, and they are, let's say, staged more like a painting, and you are the viewer who has to look very closely and look at specific kind of details to notice that something is wrong in that picture, even though it looks
Yeah.
like it's harmonic, it's great, and it's beautiful, but it isn't. Do you have any, let's say, did you take inspiration not just from other filmmakers, but also from art? And if so, which kind of art would it be?
Yeah, for this particular film, I went through the art of Bruegel a lot. I was going through his paintings a lot, but I don't know whether I consciously used any. I may have used a couple of one or two frames that looks like it, but I was also inspired by all these other filmmakers I have been watching. I wouldn't I wouldn't try to claim originality in that sense. I've always admired the work of Palathara and Lavdeas and many Chai Ming Liang, many other filmmakers too. Maybe it doesn't matter what their intention is actually. For as a viewer, what matters is what it gives to you and what is left in you. And for me, being ready to wait and being slow itself gives a certain satisfaction. And I have a when I was watching family in one of the screenings at Rotterdam, when I was sitting so close to the screen, at one point I felt that I was cutting too fast. But in the next screening, I was sitting away and I didn't feel that hurry. It felt a normal pace to me. So I think it's all subjective of our own mindset and so many other factors. Yeah.
Not to put too much emphasis on this particular subject, because I noticed that whenever you are interviewed, always the term slow cinema always comes up. But do you have the feeling that when you are compared to Love Diaz or Bellatar, and when your cinema is described as slow, do you think that this is a certain misconception? Because I have the feeling that many critics and reviewers confuse the term slow cinema with formal minimalism.
Yeah, I don't consider myself as a slow. My films are slow. Maybe in my second film, I tried to be slow in certain ways, uh, but from the next film onwards, it was I didn't consider myself as a slow filmmaker. And family definitely is not a slow film. And but I don't mind comparisons, and I don't mind people finding patterns in whatever they are watching. Uh, and it's okay, because people come from different backgrounds and their exposure are different. So that doesn't really affect me.
By the way, I don't consider your film part of slow cinema either. I don't see it. I didn't see it that way. I was just trying to was interested in how you thought of the whole thing, because whenever
Yeah.
there is a long, whenever a filmmaker uses long take, I have the feeling that naturally they are getting attributed. Yeah, oh well, you are like Love Diaz, you are like Bellatar, you are slow cinema, which I find kind of confusing.
Yeah, when in Rotterdam, somebody asked if I why I made it in a slow pace. Then I had to give a reason why. I consider, I perceive time in a certain way. Maybe that is the reason. But anyway, I wouldn't call it slow or fast. It's just the normal pace for me.
Maybe as a sort of last question, coming to I think one of the essential statements that you make is that your cinema doesn't give statements, it rather poses questions, or you would rather have questions and want to find answers to. If we think within that framework, what are questions that you would like to explore, maybe in future features or in future cinema?
There are so many questions in my mind, but I'm not able to articulate them so well. There are questions concerning society, questions concerning the nature of art and all that. But I'm not a philosopher, so I don't know how to articulate that in words. But I will try to make films about it, and But during that process, the questions become more clear, and then they also articulate themselves through images. So it's but one has to go through that process. I believe in that, in the power of the process. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was the end of my questions. Thanks for taking the time to do the interview again, and all the best of luck with Family, which I assume will also be screening in other festivals around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Ruven. Thank you so much for the questions were really good, insightful.